to the Viking Home Companion. Today's story is called Loki Gets Hammered, otherwise known as Sif's New Hairdo. Things were pretty noisy in Asgard not too long ago. You see, when it's been too quiet for too long, Loki is always looking for something to do to liven things up a bit. The only problem is that every once in a while he livens things up just a bit too much. Somehow, he thought that it would be really funny to sneak into Thor's hall in the middle of the night when Thor and Sif were sleeping and cut off all of Sif's hair. And as you might expect, Thor and Sif didn't find that at all funny. So in the morning, when everybody got woke up by Thor ranting and raging, and after the roof of Thor's hall landed over on top of the practice field in Valhalla, boom! And Thor had ran through about half the walls of the buildings of Asgard, chasing Loki down. Crash, 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 crash. No one was all that happy but Loki. Or Thor either, for that matter. Now, after they had managed to pry Thor's hands off of Loki's neck, and his eyes stopped bugging out and his face turned back to normal from being all black and blue from lack of air, they hauled him up in front of Odin for a judgment. Odin was not amused. In fact, he was getting pretty tired of Loki's shenanigans. Loki was smart enough not to pull any of his pranks on Odin himself, but Odin was getting fed up with having to keep asking, what did he do now? So he decided that not only was Loki going to have to make things up to Thor and Sif by replacing her hair, he was going to have to come up with some gifts for the rest of the other gods too, to compensate them for all the noise and such. Now Loki was a pretty crafty fella when it came to wits and all, but he wasn't all that crafty when it came to his hands. And he knew that there was no way he was going to be able to make anything himself that would be good enough to pay back all his debts. The only folks that were going to be able to do that were the dwarves. So off he went to Svartheim. Now his first stop was at the halls of the sons of Ivaldi. There just weren't no better folk to start with when it came to crafts and smith work. Loki used to visit them from time to time, mostly when things were just a little too hot for him up in Asgard. He would sing and tell them stories and jokes. He would play the riddle game with them, and he'd even let them win now and again. So they were pretty friendly with him. So he wandered into the hall and said hello. And as he was looking around while they worked, he noticed a couple of new things they had made. A long, tall spear with a broad silver blade inlaid with fine gold. They told him that its name was Mjolnir, and that when it was thrown, it would never miss its mark, no matter the skill of the hand that used it. And off to the side of the hall was a beautiful long ship, with long, sleek lines and a tall, proud bow. And it was called Skidblanir. And the dwarves told him that it could sail any sea, even the sea of the heavens. And it would always sail true and straight and could never sink. But yet it could be folded down so small that you could carry it in your pocket. Loki had to admit that them were some pretty good things. He said that he had a real challenge for them though. He needed hair made from solid gold, yet fine and soft as any real hair. And when placed on the head, it would become hair for that person. It would take root and grow as any hair would, yet still be gold. He said he knew it was a hard task and wouldn't blame them if they could not do such a thing. But if anybody could do it, it would be them. Well, the sons of Ivaldi were not going to let that challenge pass. And they scoffed at the idea that Loki thought that it was too much for them. Sure enough, just a few hours later they walked up and handed him the hair. It was long and fine and softer than you could imagine. There was no hint in the field that it was anything but normal hair. But take one look at those glittering locks and it left no doubt that they were anything but lustrous gold. Now the dwarves were ready to let him have the hair, but it took just a little bit of coaxing for them to let him have the ship and the spear as well. But he told them that no one would believe him about their skill if he didn't have something more than the hair to show the folks up in Asgard. He made all sorts of promises to them, some of which he actually meant to keep, about the thing that he could do for him and the things he could bring them in return for those items. So all in all, he was feeling pretty good when he left the hall. But he wasn't done yet. He knew that he was going to have to bring back just a bit more to smooth things over. So he trotted off to the smithy of Sindri and Brock. Now these two were not as friendly to Loki as the others were, but he knew just what to do to get their help. "Hello there, Sindri! Look at all these goodies I just got from the sons of Ivaldi. Have you ever seen any better? Look at this spear, how fine the blade and balance. And how about this boat? Sail anywhere, never sink, but I can stick it right in my pocket. Oh, and just look at this hair. It grows and it flows, but it's made of solid gold. No one can do any better." "Bah!" said he. "The sons of Ivaldi are good, but I am the master here, and I can make things that they can only dream about," Sindri said. "I know you are good, Sindri, but I would have to see that to believe it. I'm taking these back to Asgard, and I just know the gods will agree with me that no one could make anything better. I tell you, I can best them, and I will. 3 things I will make if you can take back with you. 1 for each of the 3 that you already have, and the gods will see that I am the true master," Sindri said. But Loki just laughed at him, and that was a big mistake. Sindri looked at him in a rage and said, "But if the gods judge mine as the best, I want a prize for my work." "Well, what do you want?" Loki asked. "I want your head." Now Loki had to stop and think about that for a minute. But you know, Loki is a pretty smooth fella, and he had already started to come up with a plan on how to make sure that he came out on top. "Deal," he said. Challenge accepted. Sindri goes to work. He grabs his brother and heads out into his shop. The first thing he does is grab a huge boar hide, spread it out on the floor. He kneels down and with his finger traces a series of runes on it, naming each one and its power as he goes. He then coats the bristles with gold dust and rolls up the hide. He puts the hide into the furnace and clamps the door shut, and he tells his brother, "Pump the bellows and keep them pumping. Don't you dare stop for love nor money or it will be ruined." And then he leaves. Well, Brock goes to work, huffing and a-puffing, pumping and a-pulling, working them bellows slow and sure. But Loki, of course, can't afford to let Sindri win the bet. So after Sindri leaves the shop, he turns himself into a great big horsefly, and he starts buzzing around Brock's head and face. But Brock just ignored him and goes on working them bellows until Sindri comes back. He opens the door to the furnace, and out jumps the biggest, meanest looking wild boar you have ever seen. It had tusks the size of swords and were razor sharp. It had a hide of glittering gold harder than any coat of ringed steel mail. It was a snorting and a squealing and a dancing in place, ready to rip anyone it saw to shreds, until Sindri spoke its name, and it settled down ready to follow his commands. Next, Sindri took out a bar of gold, and with his fingers traced a set of runes on it, naming each one and its power as he does. He took the gold and he set it in the furnace and he clamped the door shut. He told his brother, "Pump the bellows and keep them pumping. Don't you dare stop for love nor money or it will be ruined." And again he leaves the shop. Well, his brother goes back to work, huffing and a-puffing, pumping and a-pulling, working them bellows slow and sure. But Loki the fly comes buzzing back in again. He lands on Brock's face and he walks right up his nose and making him sneeze. He crawls into his ears and wiggles around. But Brock manages to ignore him until Sindri comes back again. He opens the door to the furnace and he reaches in with a set of tongs and he pulls out a brilliant gold arm ring. It was a twining serpent with eyes that glowed and a long tail to wrap around the arm twice. Then at the last, Sindri picks up a humongous chunk of heavy iron, and with his fingers traces of lines of runes around it in a spiral. And as he does, he names each rune and its power. Then he places the iron into the furnace, and he clamps the door shut. He tells his brother, "This is the last and the greatest of all. Pump the bellows and keep them pumping. Don't you dare stop for love nor money or else it will be ruined." And again he leaves the shop. Loki knows that it's now or never. He buzzes around Brock and in his ears and up his nose. He dances across his face and lands right on his eyeball. But Brock still refuses to stop working them bellows. So finally he crawls around onto the back of his neck and bites him hard. Chomp! And Brock finally lets go of the bellows with a shot, swatting at the fly just as Sindri walks back in through the door. "What are you doing?" he yelled, and he raced over to the furnace and yanked open the door. He reached inside with the tongs and he dragged out a huge heavy hammer that landed on the floor with a loud thunk, cracking the stones and buckling the floor. Now it wasn't exactly ruined, but since Brock had stopped pumping the bellows just a few seconds too soon, the handle was a little short. Loki flew out the door while the brothers were busy and changed back into himself and walked into the shop. "So how are you doing with those gifts? Ready to head back to Asgard for the judging?" Sindri looked at the gifts, and even with the short handle on the hammer, he was sure that he could win the bet. So they gathered them all up, and off they went to Asgard. First, Loki showed them all the golden hair, and he placed it on Sif's head, and it took root, and it glowed in the sun, and all marveled that Sif could even be more beautiful than she had been before. To Odin, he gave Gungnir, and he told him of its power. Then he took Skidbladnir from his pocket, and to the wonder of all, he unfolded it there in the square, and presented it to Frey. Then it was Sindri's turn. Sindri presented the golden boar to Frey, and told him, "This is Golden Bristle. You can ride him over land or in the air into battle, and he will never lose the shine, but glow as bright as day. You can fight from his back, or he can fight at your side." Frey was mighty pleased with both getting the boar and the boat, I can tell you that much. Next, Sindri gave the golden serpent arm ring to Odin, and he said, "This is Draupnir, the ring of increase. As beautiful as it is, it holds a secret. Every 9th night, 8 more rings just like it will fall from it, each of solid gold, the same as the first." Odin wrapped the ring around his arm, and he was just as pleased at this point as Frey. But last came the hammer. In from the gate came a large heavy cart, groaning and straining under a great weight. It was drawn by a dozen of the largest horses you have ever seen, pulling with all their strength, and it stopped in the square right in front of Thor. "This is Mjolnir, mighty Thunderer. No matter the strength you use in battle, the hammer will never fail you. You can wield it in your hand, or you can throw it at your foes, and once it has been thrown, it will never miss its mark, and it will always return to the hand that cast it." Thor lifted Mjolnir with a heave, and threw it at a wall at the edge of the square. The wall shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the hammer returned to his hand. And Tyr yelled out, "Doggone it, Thor, I just fixed that wall right after you ran through it chasing Loki." Everybody had a good laugh, except for Tyr, of course. So now the gods all got together to decide who had won the wager. While all the gifts were pretty special, there was no doubt that even with the short handle, Mjolnir was by far the greatest. Its power during Ragnarok would kill giants by the score, and plenty more before that, yeah, sure. So Sindri turned to Loki and he said, "I won the wager, now you have to pay me. I get your head." "Oh, come now, Sindri. What good will my head do you?" Loki said. "I don't know. Maybe I will use it as a doorstop in the shop. It might make a good paperweight for my desk. Then I would always have someone to talk to. I bet I could even use your mouth and teeth as a leather punch. Bonk. If nothing else, we could always kick it around for a good game of football." All the gods had a good laugh at that, as Sindri took out a short sword and got ready to take off Loki's head. But you know, Loki is a pretty smooth fella. He just looked at Sindri and he said, "Well, if you got it, you got it, but mind you, don't you go touching any of my neck. I said my head, and my head is all you get. You don't get a bit of my neck at all." "Well, how in the heck am I supposed to cut off your head if I can't touch your neck?" Sindri said. Loki looked him right in the eye with a big smile, and he said, "Not my problem." Well, Sindri was pretty miffed at that, especially since Loki got the better of him. And he said, "I wish I had a way to sew your mouth shut." And all of a sudden, poof, a needle and thread appeared right there. And quick as a wink, Cindy sewed up Loki's mouth. Not that it did a lot of good. Just as soon as Sindri was gone, Loki just tore them stitches out. Though I gotta admit, things were pretty quiet around Asgard, at least for a little while. Right up until Loki's mouth healed up and he got bored again. Yeah, sure, you betcha.